Hi, this is Miss Litton, and this is 7th period review with AP Biologist. Say hi.
Hi.
And we are continuing our discussion about Big Idea 2, about utilizing energy and molecular building blocks to grow, to reproduce, and to maintain homeostasis. And in this current review, we are on 2D, and 2D, enduring understanding, is growth and homeostasis of a biological system are influenced by changes in the what? Environment. Have we just started talking about that today?
Yeah.
When we talk about our ecology unit. So there's a little bit of review there. Okay, and so when you look at how life is organized, right? Let's go all the way to the very bottom, just for the heck of it. Ready? Atoms, molecules, organelles, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere. Yay! So we discussed recently about how the geologic community, what the geology is or what the climate is going to influence what life can live there, and then conversely that life can influence the abiotic factors, the earth, the soil. If you think about, maybe you have plants, and plants anchor themselves with what? Roots. Roots help break up the soil. Other organisms can live in that soil, help break it up. So maybe some other plants, maybe things like trees could then grow there. Instead of small shrubs, you could have, or small shrubs, you could get large shrubs, and then what? Trees, exactly. So it keeps one influencing the other. So the environment imposes selection pressure on organisms, which impacts their gene pool, and so it's a factor in the evolution. And we talked about abiotic and biotic factors. You comfy on this because we just discussed it? All right. And then take a look at this diagram, which we had in class. Why doesn't the person in the blue seat explain this? It has little add-ons here in red. Go ahead. Come on. Verbalize. It's good for you instead of me talking.
More predators.
So are the prey and the predators influencing the other population? Yeah, so these are two different populations influencing each other's density. Now what we're going to start talking about next class is we'll talk about food chains and food webs, and I bet you already know the difference between them.
Yeah.
Food chains, and remember, nutrients are going to cycle and energy is going to flow, right? So nutrients keep getting recycled, and we're looking at how the nutrients are moving through this system. And when you look at a food web, you're not just looking at one chain, you're looking at all the chains and how they overlap, right? And we're going to talk about ecological pyramids, and that at the bottom of your pyramid you have your producers, and they're getting energy usually if it's photosynthetic from the sun, right? And they are making sugars. They're taking in all of that energy and making sugars. Now, is every amount of light that's coming in, are they actually doing photosynthesis and generating sugars? No, some of it is transmitted, right? Some of it is reflected. So not all of the energy is harvested. And then of that, when plants do photosynthesis, they need some of those sugars for themselves. So not all, they need to do a cellular respiration for themselves in order to stay alive. So not all of it can get passed on to the next level. And by and large, the amount, if you've done this review yet that I give you, how much gets passed on at each level? 10%. You know, about 10%, and 90% is lost. And that's why when you think about pyramids, it's not like a standard like Egyptian pyramid, because these things are dropping off and only 10% is moving on. And that's why you only see maybe 4 levels, because by the time you get to the top of this pyramid, there's so little left to harvest. And some of that energy that gets lost as heat, some gets lost as defecating, urinating, running, using up energy. So not all of it, not all of what comes in ends up getting passed to the next level. So I like this little diagram. If you look at the top, you can see biological diversity has a variety of organisms, and ecosystems consists of community, and they have what kind of factors? Abiotic and biotic. And a community consists of, different populations. And then adaptations prevent extinction of a species. A community has many species. And then you can relate a food web to species. A food web consists of producers. What would be an example of a producer? Plants, okay, algae, consumers. Now, you could have what? Fish, sure. Do you remember that? Do you know, we haven't talked about this yet, but what do you call things that eat just plants?
Herbivores.
And what do you call things that eat animals?
Carnivores.
Carnivores, good. And we'll talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. You have predator-prey relationships, and you also have what? Decomposers, who break down usually dead things, and so those nutrients can keep cycling through the system. And when you look at food chains and food webs, you always want to think of the arrow. Think of it that it shows which way. If you take a look here, look how the arrow is. You want to think of these as mouths. So this energy is going here. Whoa. And so what happens is, I have seen diagrams on tests where they ask which way is it going the right way, you know, and it always shows the way that energy is moving. Those nutrients are moving. Okay, so think of like the frog, think of it as his mouth, and he's accepting this bug. Okay, good? All right. All right. Oh wait, there might be a question here. There just might be. I don't know what it is. So wait, I gotta remove some students first. Be something you have to do today after school. Wait, I gotta remove these. Be something you have to do after school today. You have to do Sasha after school? I'm assuming that's his homework. Oh, you have to do an ed puzzle. Ramjet? Oh, you're trying to say Rajat and you don't know how to say it. Okay, I'm done. John. Ramcoot. Track. Okay, there you go. One question. We're all tired today, so there's no guarantees on this review. Was it an easy question?
I got it right.
Aw, yay! Those are the biotic factors. So, 3 of you are struggling. I hope you know who you are, strugglers. All right. So, there are 55 enduring understandings. This is number 21. Right? So we're not quite halfway through. So take a look at this diagram, and person in the slate seat, why don't you go ahead and explain this diagram? Go ahead. See if you can. Start at population and evolution.
So the environment causes like death and elimination. So like the survivors of the reinforcement, but like the environment also causes like disturbance and mutation. So like evolution, like species, and then essentially just reproducing.
Jen, would you say more?
So remember, the big idea we are looking, or what we're focusing on here is, how do you respond to your environment? Well, the environment can do a couple of things. The environment can cause what? Death. You're not adapted, die. It could be, you know, random death, but it's usually due to lack of some sort of adaptation, or it can reinforce what you need to survive. It's eliminating everybody else, and so it reinforces who needs to survive. But also the environment, you can have disturbances. Those can cause mutations. Those mutations, if they are good mutations that are helpful in an adaptation, those will be reinforced by that environment. Okay? So then, another thing, this, you know, jumping around, now let's look at organisms and systems, how they respond to their environment. So what is this person taking right here? Blood pressure. Why might your blood pressure vary? What? Because of clots? Yeah, but why might your blood pressure go up? Stress.
Hypertension.
What? Hypertension. What is hypertension?
High blood pressure.
Right? And what does that usually do to?
Stress.
Or atherosclerosis, right? Plaque in your arteries or something like that, right? So our blood pressure will vary depending on the conditions. You remember how we talked about salt? Remember Hello Kidney?
So scarred.
Yes. You're scarred by it? So if you have, if your blood is hypertonic, if you have more salt in your blood, you're going to therefore have more water. As the water levels increase, so too your blood volume goes up. If your blood volume goes up, then so too will be your blood pressure in order to move it around. Some other adaptations that you might have are things like responding to your environment is your skin. We can think of our skin as being a barrier, right? But it also prevents our tissues from what?
Falling out.
Oh, falling out? Sure, sure. What kind of skin? I don't have that kind of skin.
Scaly skin.
Yeah, so what is this skin doing right here? Could be protection. What else? Drying out. We live on land. Land is arid, so we're concerned with desiccation, right? Because we have the fear of drying out, yet we need moisture in order to do what? Gas exchange, right? So this is why, are you remembering all this?
Yep.
So our lungs are inside. Remember, for gases to get into our blood, it has to dissolve, right? So we have to have a moist area. Remember, it needs to be large, thin, moist, right? And next to some system if you're multicellular. So your skin adaptations, that's one way to respond to your environment. If you're a salamander, do you need to have that kind of skin? This kind of skin if you're a salamander? No, where are you living? In the water, where it is moist. Or you might leave the water for short amounts of time. This is all responding to your environment. Some organisms move back and forth between salt and fresh water. They're very good osmoregulators. This is salmon, and they spend part of their time in fresh water originally. And then they move out to salt water and then back into fresh water. Organisms that live in estuaries, where you can either be bathed by fresh water or salt water, are really good osmoregulators. And those organisms tend to just have the same osmotic concentration in their tissues as in the environment around them. And their tissues can handle that. Can you have plants who normally need fresh water? Can they grow in salt water? No, they can't. Okay, because usually they're specialized to the environment that they're around. Okay, here's salmon swimming upstream. So we talked about the way our kidneys might function, whether you are in a freshwater environment or a saltwater. So let's think back to kidneys. Okay? Thinking. And the functional unit of a kidney is a what? Nephron. Good. And so the first part is glomerular filtration. Yeah, that's what I meant. Okay. And hydrostatic pressure forces fluids out. Okay, plasma and everything that's dissolved in that plasma, which might be gases, proteins, nutrients, salts, nitrogenous waste, vitamins, hormones. Remember all that? Yeah, road trip. Exactly. But the thing we're concerned about in glomerular filtration usually is the loss of what? Water. Yeah, and we need to take back as much water as we possibly can. So in glomerular filtration, well, it depends, right, on what kind of environment you're in. But glomerular filtration pushes everything out. Then you have tubular reabsorption, where you take back what you need, and that is water. It might be some sugars, but the way we get water to move is we pump what? Salt, and water follows. Good. And then what's the third one is tubular secretion. And then we actively transport anything out that we don't want to have in our bodies. So you look at freshwater organisms. Freshwater organisms, they tend to be what to their environment? Hypertonic. So water flows in. So if you look here, their filtration rate is very high because they can afford to lose some water because water is always coming into them. Whereas when you look at a saltwater organism, they tend to be what to their environment? Hypotonic. Water must flow from the hypo. They tend to lose water. That's why their filtration rate would be what? Low. And because they tend to lose water, their urine is low. And then they need to get rid of all that salt. because the salt wants to move into them, right? And they also get some salt from just their drinking. And then if you, conversely, fresh water, their volume of their urine is really high because they can afford to lose all that water. And they need to actively transport salt in because they tend to lose it to their environment. So the more you make it make sense and the less memorization, the better off. Okay? So a question might be is what prevents a freshwater fish from maintaining homeostasis if you move it into a saltwater environment? And then you could explain that, right? Okay. So marine invertebrates and cartilaginous fish, they tend to be isotonic to their environment. And the way chondrict, these are sharks, do it is by maintaining high amounts of what? Do you remember? Urine. Yeah, they keep their urine levels high in their blood to help them be isotonic to the salt water around them. Terrestrial animals tend to lose both water and ions to the environment, so they're always being careful about that. We already talked about this. Why doesn't the person in the blue seat explain this right here? You're like, I'm right here, they can hear me. All right. So we've already done this. So how do we get water to come in? Through the foods we eat or metabolism. Why did I say metabolism?
Creating water and photosynthesis.
Who? Not in photosynthesis. Who catches the electrons at the bottom? Oxygen forming water. And that's part of the electron transport chain, right? In cellular respiration. As long as it's aerobic, you're going to generate water. Okay. How does water go out? Okay, evaporation from our skin, from our lungs, feces, and excretion are all ways that we could lose water. But we went over that already. Cells, body fluid regulation. It's just talking about all the different ways that we could gain or lose fluids. So we look at our cells. Our cells are surrounded by our tissue fluid, so there's exchange there. And then our tissue fluid is going to exchange with our blood at the what? Capillaries, right? And then the capillaries, as they move through these different systems, different things can happen. They could be picking up nutrients. It could be getting rid of water if need be. So anyway, those are all exchange places. We looked at some organisms are adapted. They have salt glands to get rid of excess salt. And then here we are with our body fluid regulation. And here's some other examples. I think we're going to come back to the nephron in a minute. Do you remember what? Oh, it's listed already. What are these called? Flame cells, and that's in order to move fluid. Earthworms have nephridia, and they have a nephrostome that extends into the segment in front in order to pick up any fluids. And then, like us, they have a capillary beds running next to their tubes so that their capillaries can dump anything into those tubes they don't want and reabsorb anything that they do want. And we took a look at this about what you excrete and why. So why doesn't the slate person explain what do you excrete and why? And I'll give you this one to help you out. Go ahead. So if you live in an environment where you have a lot of water, you don't have to worry about spending energy, right, in order to convert toxic ammonia into something like urea or something even less toxic like uric acid, which precipitates out. Now, why you would want to ever make something like uric acid, maybe like you want something that is insoluble to water because you want to store it as a solid. Not in solution where you need water to have it in there like urea, right? You need water in order to transport urea like we do to exit our bodies. But birds will make uric acid, which will be a solid that they can just add to their poop and out their cloaca. Okay? And they'll spend that energy to do that because the trade-off is then they don't have to worry about the water, and especially if you're in an egg. Kangaroo rats, an adaptation they have, they very rarely drink water and they just get all the water they need from cellular respiration, right? Okay, and watering hole, we have to drink. Malpighian tubules and insects. And remember, insects have a what kind of circulatory system? open circulatory system. So their body fluids, they're not transporting oxygen in those. Do you remember how they get oxygen to their cells? Or to the T? Tracheal tubes, right? So they're worried about waste and nutrients. And so they have these Malpighian tubules that extend out into their abdominal cavity, and it'll pick up any waste, and they can get rid of it, or they will put it back into their system. It'll get reabsorbed out of their intestines, which would be like right here. And this was us. We talked about when you eat a steak, small intestines, here's the steak, and digest protein into amino acids. Do you remember the structure of an amino acid? Are you envisioning it? Central carbon, H. What did we draw down below? R. How many different R groups?
21.
And then over here we might have a carboxyl and a amino group, right? Okay, so you're digesting the protein into amino acids. Number 2, the liver converts the excess amino acids into urea. It does it through the process first of deamination. It has to remove, the NH3, that group off. And then if they can convert it into another amino acid if they need to. Otherwise, if you have excess, it will convert it into urea and put it back into your blood supply. Your kidney then filters out the urea, and then it moves into your bladder, and then you can pee it out. Okay, and this is the structure of the nephron, but we already went through this part of it, so we probably feel pretty comfortable, yes? Okay, this is all parts of our excretory system. It's not just our kidneys here, because we can lose water, right, through our lungs. We can lose water through our skin. We can get rid of salts through our skin as well. Our intestines is another place that we can get rid of things. And here's your nephron. Why don't you each think of one good question to ask the other? Each think of one good question to ask the other about the nephron. And then don't let them look at the board when you're asking it. Come on, ask one good question. Are you good? Do you need to ask me any questions about that? Because I pre-reviewed that before we got to that section. You need any questions? Okay, so then let's talk about our pituitary gland and ADH. ADH stands for? Good. Which part of your pituitary gland secretes that? Which one? Posterior? Is that what you're telling me? I agree. What else does it secrete? Oxytocin. Remember? It could make, it's concerned about all those types of fluids and things. Oh, is that for me?
Buffer, and I'll just put this in the fridge.
Okay. Love you very much, Lee.
I love you.
Okay, and let's take a look at this picture. Do we remember this? Yeah. Okay, and so do you remember in this one we were talking about ultimately aldosterone, and aldosterone comes from your adrenal cortex, and that affects how much sodium is reabsorbed and how much water, right? And it's in the category of a mineral corticoid. Is it a steroid or a protein hormone? Steroid. The hormones from the adrenal cortex and then your gonads are your steroid hormones. Everything else is protein. If you can just remember which ones, okay? So gonads and the adrenal cortex are your steroid hormones. So we talked about how does it do that, okay? And we talked about how the kidneys will secrete renin. And what's the role in renin? Well, if we have to go back, the liver secretes angiotensinogen, right? And then angiotensinogen will be converted to angiotensin 1 via what? Renin. And then it's still not ready to go. It needs to go from angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And you have to use your ACE from your lungs to do that. And then angiotensin 2 will then tell, right, your adrenal cortex to start secreting what? Aldosterone. So here is a really good example about several organs working together in order for you to respond to your environment, which is we need more water, So we need to reabsorb more salt, and aldosterone is doing that. Okay. All right. So there's a really cool diagram. Okay, and conversely, if your blood pressure is too high, remember we talked about the heart secreting ANH, which inhibits both renin and ADH. And I think I have 2 slides on that. And also what the kidneys can do is they can regulate our pH levels with our fluids. And the hypothalamus is very important in controlling and regulating your pituitary gland. And we talked about how your hypothalamus can control your pituitary, and your pituitary control your thyroid gland. Do you remember that feedback loop? Of course you do. We talked about it yesterday. We talked about how the thyroid gland helps you regulate your metabolism and something else. What else? Calcium levels. What does the thyroid do to your calcium levels? Lowers them. Remember calcitonin? Calcitone it down now. And the parathyroid gland will help elevate them. So I think we're almost done. Oh, no, we're not almost done. Where are we at for time? We can do this really fast. This is the end of it, pretty much. Okay, so let's quickly review the immune system. Just a small little system. Just itty bitty. Okay, so the 2 key organs, you remember, was your thymus gland and your bone marrow. Remember, all of your blood cells come from your bone marrow, but your B cells mature in your bone marrow, right? And your T cells mature in your thymus gland. So when your environment comes at you, and if what's coming at you are pathogens and they're getting in your body, you need to take care of those pathogens. So your first line of defense would be your skin or secretions. But if they get past that, we talked about things like natural killer cells. Remember that? And we talked, what are some other cells that would take care of? Like the policemen of your body. Eosinophils. Basophils. You're naming all the hard ones. What are the most common ones? We have macrophages. Those start out as monocytes and then they get bigger. Remember that? Remember neutrophils and dendritic cells, right? So all of those cells are going to help defend your body if they get past all of your low pH and hairs and saliva. And so we call in the good guys, and here are all those good guys. Remember these guys? And mast cells secrete histamine, which causes the blood vessels to be leaky. So it enables then other cells to get out and fight, if you remember that. Natural killer cells kill. Macrophages eat. They start off as monocytes. Neutrophils complement, drills holes. And then when we look at your B and T cells, those are like your special forces, right? So, it wrecks these. Okay, so we talked about each of those. Move on. I think you remember. Here we're looking at an inflammatory reaction and all the things that take place. We might need platelets out there to clot. We talked about fibrinogen becoming fibrin, right? In order to prevent blood from losing blood. You can see here a macrophage. You can see dendritic cells are eating. You could elevate the temperature, which might kill off the bacteria. We talked about protective proteins. We talked about interferon. And in interferon, if you recall, if a cell becomes infected by a virus, it's a warning that you would send out to all the other cells, like, don't let anything in because there's viruses out here. Complement, we already hit that. So let's talk about our special forces. So for our special forces, some phagocyte eats that pathogen and presents it. And what it needs to do is it needs to find what is he looking for? A B cell or a T cell?
T cell.
He's looking for a T cell. And when it presents that pathogen, is it going to present it on an MHC1 or an MHC2 protein? MHC2. I will help you. So when he presents, when he presents, do you need me? No. You're just saying hi? Yeah. Okay, love you. When he presents that on the antigen on its MHC2 protein, he's trying to find, and where would be a good place to hang out where you might find a T cell? In your lymph nodes, right? Because Remember when we know about our circulatory system, and at the capillaries we push out more hydrostatic pressure, then osmotic pressure draws back in, and that goes into the lymph vessels, and it goes to the lymph nodes, and then gets returned to the subclavian vein? Yeah. Okay, so hang out at the lymph nodes, because all that tissue fluid is going to be going through there eventually, and so you're going to present it inappropriately to a helper T cell, and if it's a match, and then you trigger that helper T cell, then he will become activated. And a B cell, he has to be activated by the pathogen himself, not an antigen presenting cell giving it to him. That's just how T cells work. A B cell needs it directly. He needs a virgin B cell needs confirmation by a T cell, and then he will grow and produce plasma cells, and plasma cells are the ones that are going to make what? Antibodies. And he'll make what? Memory cells. Now, that activated T cells, he will also make memory cells, but he will make cytotoxic T cells that do the killing, cell-to-cell combat, our own cells that are infected. Whereas the plasma cells make antibodies, which get released out in the system to tag the free-floating, the viruses, the bacteria that aren't in our cells. And the T cells are taking care of things that have already invaded us. And then you have a faster response the next time, because of you have the memory cells that are there. Exactly. So, okay, good. That's it. We already went over the T cells. If you look at an antibody has two arms, so it can hold two pathogens at a time, which is good for clumping, because you could have several antibodies, hanging onto one antigen there. The base of the Y determines how it's going to be killed. Usually in where it's located. IgG is the most common one. IgE has to do with allergic reactions, remember, and mast cells. We talked about MHC1s, MHC2s. Are you okay with that? I went over that. Okay. Here you can see T cells. Natural killer cells are ones that don't go to the school of thymus. And become special forces. And remember, the difference between B and T cells is they are specific to one, maybe two antigens. Okay. And here is just annotated all the things we've already talked about. You just take a look at that. Anything scary? There's the whole reaction. Okay, so innate, what we're born with, please. Everybody has that. Acquired somehow in your lifetime. It could either be active because you were actually exposed to something, you got sick and you made your own memory cells, or you were exposed to one that could have made you sick but it was weakened. So you got your whole immune response and all your armies made and your antibodies, but you got it because you got a vaccine. Or it could be borrowed. This is in the short term. This could be a mother breastfeeding a child, or it could be because you just got bit by a snake and you need antibodies now, or you just got exposed to something and you need antibodies now. These right here, this will not last you your whole lifetime. This will only last you a short amount of time because you haven't actually gone through the process of finding the virgins that you need, so you have no what cells? You have no memory cells. Good. The second exposure, you should have a higher amount because you've already met it before, and you'll generate a great deal more antibodies. Plant defenses are a little bit different. Sharp spines, leathery leaves, poisonous hormones they can secrete. And that is it. You did it. Whew. I think this is the last enduring understanding for this one. And then we will be done with 2 and move on to 3. You're super smart. I'm proud of you. Have a piece of toast.